Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Finstep Asia Edge podcast live from Money 2020 Asia. We're here in Bangkok, Thailand with a very exciting guest whom I've known for a few years, but getting to meet after a long time, Irina Chuchkina, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Volt.io. Irina has had a very interesting journey across fintech over the last few years, and so we're going to be discussing about that and her views on how fintech's evolved in Asia and Europe. Irina, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me, Mashira. I'm doing well, thank you.
How has been the trip over to Bangkok and the introduction to Money 2020 Asia?
I'm always very excited to come back to Asia. As you know, I spent about 8 years of my life in Asia, and that was one of perhaps the most exciting and eye-opening chapters of my journey, of my life. So yeah, I love coming back.
Yeah, and it's quite buzzy, right? A lot of different stages today, as well as we were talking about, like high quality of speakers.
Yes, very much so.
Attendees, yeah.
This is just, so we are recording this in the beginning of day one. So you can imagine the energy is through the roof. And as always, Money 2020 attracts perhaps some of the highest quality attendees from across the ecosystem. So everyone in Asia is here.
They sure are, and we are glad you're here with us today. Yeah. So why don't we start about, I wanted to get to understand your career progression in financial services and broadly in fintech. What's been your journey over these few years?
So the Irina story. All right.
Yeah.
So, look, I've actually spent more than, I think it's coming to 20 years now in financial services and fintech. I started, I'm originally Russian.
Sure.
Please don't take it against me.
No, not at all.
I started in retail banking back in Russia. That was quite exciting, actually, because banking was still relatively early and it felt almost like a startup, interestingly. But I was responsible for building products based around payments, cards. And that brought me to my next really important chapter, Visa. I then joined Visa, spent about 7 years in total being part of Visa, launched contactless across a few markets. That was perhaps one of the formative experiences in years, but that's also when I decided that at some stage I wanted to maybe expand my horizons a little bit. And I moved back in 2014. I moved to Singapore. I decided to study, to apply to business school. And somehow during that year of doing my MBA, I think I caught the startup bug. I realized that I actually am really curious to join, to switch sides. And from the corporate, I decided to join a really exciting young startup called Grab. You may be familiar with it.
And it was a small company now.
Relatively, it was like medium-sized, decent size. I think when I was joining, they probably had about 30 million downloads. Yeah. When I was leaving in 2019, they had about 200 million users. So it was a fascinating growth story. And it was also the story that taught me so much about, first of all, how to build a super app, but also how much the super apps are reliant on payments. And that wallet, really, the GrabPay wallet, became the core part of the super app proposition.
Sure.
Then after Grab, I decided to move back into the core payments again, because payments are so important. I joined Rapid in Asia, and then after that I spent a couple of years at Tunes, which is a global cross-border payments infrastructure player, and now I'm with Volt, building real-time payments everywhere.
It just fascinates me. So a similar journey in some senses of coming to East Asia for doing an MBA. That's what I did in Hong Kong, and then got into fintech a couple of years later, and
never looking back.
And never looked back in some senses. I hope not to either. But what keeps fascinating me is whenever you look at breakdowns of startup ecosystems globally, typically in the initial stages, 50% or 75% are payment startups. Right? I was looking at the Indonesian payment breakdown in 2019, and out of 250, about 150 were payments at that stage. So you do see that, but payments you keep seeing new startups keep coming in, and it feels like this is something that's never redundant or solved in some senses, and there's always somebody coming up with some new innovation. Why do you think that's the case in payments? Like, why is this so... it's very, very competitive, it's very crowded, yet a lot of people want to get into it. Lower margins also to a certain extent in retail, but why?
Well, look, I think the reason why payments are so exciting is because money makes the world go round, because payments are essential for any commerce, whatever business and industry you're in, whether it's B2B, trade, I don't know, import, export, manufacturing, e-commerce, FinTechs, whatever, it doesn't matter. Everything relies on payments, and as long as there is friction in the journey, there will be room to innovate and to bring value. And whenever money leaves one hand and transfers to, well, I guess another account or another entity, usually there is room for making money as well. A little bit of that, transactional fee. And when money crosses borders, there's also even a little bit more room to make money. And then it's also enabling all of the different, like other use cases, lending and so on and so forth. So, but within the whole fintech ecosystem, I know that payments are really exciting. It's very dear to my heart. Last time I counted, there were 27 different verticals. There's a lot of different, when we talk about fintech, we tend to generalize. Yeah. But there's so many different flavors.
Yeah, I think we can no longer generalize fintech. And what I mean by that, it's a bit like saying banking is one vertical, but in reality, you're breaking down so many. And in fintech, the depth keeps on increasing in what you can do.
Can you tell me what JP Morgan does? Like there's 1,000 different things that
banks,
do.
And payments and investment and and a variety of different elements. When you were talking about your experience with Visa, and I'm dialing back a little bit because I find I think it would be very interesting for the audience to understand how that implementation of contactless went, right? So maybe talking about what was exciting, what were the challenges, and what were the victories when you were doing that for what is the world's largest, if not top 2 card players, right? Even at that time, for sure. To move to contactless, it would have been a big difference,
So, from memories, I remember that the whole contactless strategy had actually a very long vision, so long-term vision. It wasn't about something that you would do in 3 or 6 months or 12 months, which is usually what like the fintechs that's the horizon that the fintechs would be looking at. Yeah. When you're someone like Visa, you have to change the sort of the fabric of the whole ecosystem, even if it's just one market. There's a lot of effort that you need to put in before you actually start really seeing the results. And whether it applies, to countries such as Singapore, which has actually probably some of the strongest penetration of contactless, or the UK, there are a lot of really big moving parts that are involved, and unfortunately there is a lot of inertia that you have to overcome. So I remember that those plans were for Singapore, for instance, I think they were formulated with like 7 to 10 years strategy and the roadmap.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the really important things in the lessons, probably a very obvious lesson now, is that one of the core components of mass adoption is transport. If you get contactless on transport, that just drives the habit so much and so quickly, probably faster than any other retail chain that you can bring in. So back in my days, we were working with actually the team in Singapore, the team in Asia, to implement the solutions on national transport systems in Russia, and then I was seeing the same parallels in other parts of the world. London Underground was one of the first ones to adopt contactless, and then in Singapore now you could use that as well, whether it's the buses or MRT.
What would you say was the tipping point for that, adoption? Such?
The tipping point is, as I mentioned, probably the transport. But I think in general, when you have to think about the ecosystem, there are 3 main stakeholders. Banks, issuers, have to be on board, and then you need to probably spend a good couple of years educating them, and then actually starting to convincing them that they need to start issuing those and adopt any of those technologies. The second one is merchants and retailers, because they have to start accepting contactless, and that takes, I guess, through working via acquirers. But then the third one is consumers. So all 3 parts of the ecosystem have to simultaneously be equally aware, and you need to run that education. You need to kind of manage all of the moving parts in parallel. Sometimes you need to involve, I don't know, like even governments to an extent.
Yeah.
So it's probably one of the most complex things. So if you think about the implementation of contactless in, I don't know, or let me give you another example. I was at Visa, I think, 2013, 2014. We were discussing the US getting rid of the signature and starting to introduce chip and PIN in 2022. So sometimes you really need the 7 years or 5 years of working with the system. So I have a huge amount of respect to my former colleagues that have done all of this really important groundwork because it changed everything. I don't know how now we can't even imagine how life was before this. I carry my phone everywhere. I don't have the wallet with me.
Yeah.
Even here in Bangkok, I don't think I need it. You can use contactless at the store, at the 7-Eleven or at all of the convenience stores.
Yeah.
I can rely on my Grab app. Everything is now fully digital.
Yeah, it fascinates me as well. I was living in Dubai for a year and a half, and as a contactless ecosystem, it's quite fascinating that you could pay for even for 1 dirham chai. 1 dirham roughly equates to about 30 cents US dollars, right? Or a 2 dirham samosa. I mean, at times I'm not carrying cash. I'm like, hey, and this is a small hole in the wall shop, and he's like, yeah, just tap and go, right? And you were talking, and as before we started the session, we were talking about those pivotal moments in impacting fintech over the last, say, 2 decades or so. And one of the things that you spoke about was specifically around the App Store. Do you want to?
Yes.
I think it's an apt moment to talk about that. Why you found that to be a fascinating and important element for fintech.
We were trying to figure out what were the phases and the stages that the fintech ecosystem had to go through, and what was the most important, indeed, pivotal moments in that journey. One of them, the first one, well, from my perspective, was the launch of App Store, indeed.
Yeah.
All of the mobile apps that started to evolve and develop around the world, it opened up not just fintech, it opened a world of opportunities across all tech. E-commerce, I don't know, well, money-saving apps, like it's gaming. I think all of this has gotten unblocked and accelerated through the introduction of App Store. The second pivotal moment, which apparently happened around the same time, was the launch of AWS and the whole kind of API platformization, accessibility and availability of API infrastructure, which basically enabled, the so-called as a service, I guess, business model in general. What that helped is you suddenly had access to services that you wouldn't have typically have. You would be able, if you were a fintech founder, you would be able to literally shop around and find someone who would be able to give you access to, payment capabilities, card issuing capabilities, processing, data collection, KYC. If you look around the show floor here at Money 2020, you would be able to probably pick up the full, all of the components that will be exactly all of the ingredients in order to build your next super app. Yeah. There is, in fact, a super app as a service here. Also, a company called Boxo that you could use in order to embed your services into the super app that you're building. You can buy pretty much everything. And that was a really important moment that probably started picking up about, again, 10, 12 years ago. Yeah. The third pivotal moment was COVID. And it was a painful experience for a lot of families, but it just drastically accelerated that natural trajectory that we saw in the digitization of everything.
Correct.
Payments included. And I know that for some people, the demonetization in India in 2015, 2016, was probably the really kind of historical moment. But globally, if you think about demonetization moment, that was COVID. That spring of 2019.
2020, yeah.
In 2020, so it's not even that far.
It's just 4 years.
But it was a magical moment for anyone who was doing anything related to fintech and payments.
Yeah, I think there's a McKinsey report that compares the adoption as well as the increase in value, right? So,
and it's not coming back.
Yeah, it's not. It was 2x from 2016 to 2019 versus like the growth versus 2020 alone was 2x to 4x in most markets, including Europe and US. Of course, Asia was probably leading in that sense, just more people coming online, right? That's another factor. And now you probably have a vast majority of ecosystems where contactless payments is very much embedded in the ecosystem, right? Talking about super apps, right? And money and e-commerce. I think Alipay and WeChat would be two super apps in broad senses from China, kind of have had that massive influence all the way from Grab to Gojek or GoTo now to what Elon Musk wants to build with X. Right? It's always this conversation about his dream of having this super app in America. You worked for this behemoth super app here in Asia. They started with transport being one of the key elements, right? But what for you was interesting, or any insights that you're allowed to share on the integration of payments across different services, the complexity or the fun in doing that? Yeah.
It's the fun, actually. It's also a very humbling experience. If you move, so the main takeaway of the time that I spent in Asia was how diverse the world is, but also sometimes how similar, how you can find patterns between maybe unexpected, countries or data points. And I think maybe I'll be using the example of not actually the super apps, but the payment cultures evolving around the world. And the topic that excites me very much is real-time payments and the proliferation of real-time payments. Yeah. I have huge conviction that real-time payments is the technology that is going to change the fabric of payments and the world of payments. The whole ecosystem will start moving towards a very different place. Yeah. But let me just let's pull up a few examples. There are around 80 countries right now that have implemented different types and models of real-time payment schemes around the world. Around 80, maybe now coming. I think there's a few more that are actually sort of impending with the recent, I think, news from Canada coming that it will be joining the movement. But the flavor of this real-time payment experience could be very different. It probably started in India with UPI implementation, and it continues to be one of the strong cases. And then Brazil, Pix, and Pay Now, Singapore, here in Thailand, PromptPay is an absolutely live FPS in Hong Kong, UK, faster payments, and I think when you compare the experience, the principles are the same, but the implementation is a little bit different. And if you think about, coming back to your original question, bringing this all together is usually a really complicated thing, and that's where platforms are bringing value. The eye-opening experience about the Asia part was how different we all are, and how sometimes we tend being very myopic. When we spend too much time in our home region, we end up making that assumption that the rest of the world operates roughly at the same pace and with roughly the same principles. It's not the case. I found some of my most interesting and eye-opening experiences when I was trying to expose myself and bring myself, out of my shell, out of my natural sort of habitat, while coming here to Thailand and actually speaking to the local people, trying to expose myself to what's happening in Latin America. It's a fascinating region. There is so much innovation, but you'll see that also certain things in Latin America are very similar to things that we're seeing in some parts of Asia as well. Yeah. So sometimes you can draw parallels, and I think that experience teaches you a lot. From the technological perspective, it's difficult to stay aware of all of those things, but it's also mind-blowingly fascinating how it keeps developing. It's like this world just keeps changing and evolving all the time. It's
a good segue into, as we come closer to the end of this, is the comparison of Asia and Europe where you are now, right? So you went from building things in Asia, as you mentioned, Grab, Rapid in Asia, and they were an emerging economy, but also a lot of innovation happening to support that. How are you finding the role with Volt and broadly the ecosystem in UK, Europe versus what we see in Asia?
So for context, after my Singapore chapter, I've moved to London. That was in 2022. It's been now 2 years. And I think I was moving with an expectation then that things will be looking and feeling differently. That was indeed the case. One of the things, how things compare, let me try to explain it. Europe historically has been perhaps one of the centers of excellence for payment experience or product experience, user experience. So I think this continues to be, setting examples and setting the bar high for the rest of the ecosystem. But it's definitely, because it's a little bit more homogeneous, and it's not as exposed to this kind of broad variety of the payments or, cultures in general. I think it's perhaps a little bit more less creative in terms of finding kind of new combinations of service models. Things that have been happening across Philippines and Indonesia, like with, those mom and pop stores for suddenly becoming micro super apps for the neighborhood, would probably never happen in the UK, but they just don't have that same need. They leave the UK is setting examples in some things, but should also possibly look eastwards to learn and to bring in some of the insights from some of the emerging, more creative markets. And last thing, in terms of comparing the two, one thing about Asia that I love so much is how strong the community here is. Very tightly knit together. People know and support each other. It doesn't matter whether you belong to the competitive, to competitive companies. Everyone is growing the pie for each other, and everyone's always reliant and can actually expect help from the community.
Completely agree. I think it's a great community here where across regions there's been a lot of collaboration. As we close, I would love to hear more about what Volt is doing to change that innovation and the culture for payments in UK and Europe.
So Volt has been built around real-time payments, connecting real-time payments around the world. Currently, we offer 30 countries: UK, Europe, Australia, and Brazil. But there will be more countries. There will be, I'm hoping, adding in this region as well. And as I said, the reason why I joined is because I have a huge conviction that this will be the defining technology in the next 5 to 10 years. We will be growing and we will continue to connect all of the real-time payments for both, allowing, pay by bank experience as well as possibly adding other elements to it. And the reason why I think I'm enjoying my work is because it's global in nature, so I can continue to learn. We think that real-time payments should be everywhere, and we are trying to connect them wherever they exist, embracing that local flavors and embracing that local payment culture, and creating beautiful payment experience in the principles of the Western,
I think connecting into cross-border real-time payments is going to be a massive story. We're already seeing that with UPI, with Singapore, with Middle East, Hong Kong, with Thailand and other places.
Oh, for sure, and everyone will benefit
and
from
when that network builds up for real-time payments, that will change the remittance game as well. Quite a bit, I would imagine. So.
A lot of industries can benefit from that technology. And remember what we started with, removing friction. Whenever we can remove friction, we can create value and make a difference.
Irina, it's been a pleasure having you on the Finstep Asia Edge. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Follow us on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube, and keep an eye on our LinkedIn and Instagram for more updates. It's been a pleasure being here at Money 2020, talking to Irina Chukchina, Chief Marketing Officer of Volt.io, and we are ending now. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.